On September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center suffered a terrorist attack and eventually crumbled into a pile of rubble. Thousands of people lost their lives. In total, only 12 survivors were pulled from the rubble. 2 Port Authority police officers named Wilma Jimeno and Sergeant John McLaughlin were among them, and they were buried 20 feet below the twisted debris. In a scene of a much longer story, Staff Sergeant Carnes and Sergeant Thomas actually risked their lives climbing over the rubble to call out and search for survivors, even though the rest of the rescue workers had been ordered back. They actually, in a sense, probably broke the rules and went out there. They weren't going to give up. And that's when they heard the faint cries of the last 2 men to be rescued alive. And though Carnes couldn't actually see Jimeno, he could hear him and he kept talking to him. And Jimeno was calling, "Don't leave us," because the 20 feet down below, they had heard other people come and go, and they didn't want to be left alone down there in the darkness. They'd been trapped for 9 hours, and the hope was quickly vanishing from them. And in very dramatic fashion, Staff Sergeant Carnes yells back to the two trapped men, "I am a U.S. Marine. You are my mission." Well, welcome here. My name is Ken, author of Freedom Session and Executive Director of Freedom Session International. And you're here, you probably received a little Becoming a Sponsor brochure handed to you by someone that probably knows you. And that's why you're here at this orientation. I want to thank you for coming, because you are about to enter into one of the most profound and intimate ministry experiences available. And the only qualities, apart from knowing Jesus Christ personally, that you must have are authenticity, compassion, and confidentiality. In terms of authenticity, I'm talking about you need to be walking in truth and a reasonable measure of healing yourself. Compassion, we'd like you to honestly care about people and be willing to hear their story without judgment. And confidentiality, well, you've been chosen because somebody is willing to trust you with some of the most intimate details of their life. And we're asking you to carry that confidentiality with integrity and responsibility. So we've got about 45 minutes together. The very first thing I'd like you to do is find someone that you don't know, and I would like you to tell them your 90-second testimony. Go ahead, your 90-second salvation testimony. Go ahead, you'll have 90 seconds. Someone will tell you when to switch, and we'll pick it up. All right, so hope you enjoyed that, getting to know someone. Now, how many of you told your conversion testimony when you actually became a Christian? And that's fine. That's part of your salvation story, but actually salvation means to be set free, made whole, and delivered, and that is the Freedom Session journey the person who invited you to attend this little seminar has been on. You're here because someone's chosen you to be that person who will hear their story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and some things that they've never told another living soul. In many cases, they'll actually be sharing memories and information with you they have not told another living being. In some cases, they're going to be sharing information with you that they've not had the courage to tell themselves. And they're going to be sharing with you some information that they have vowed to take to the grave. And frankly, they're petrified. Because most Christians, and perhaps even you, most Christians believe the lie that if you knew everything about me, you wouldn't love me or you would reject me. And that's what they're feeling. In fact, some of them are anticipating you to reject them. And we're hoping that you show them differently. God wants you to break the power of that lie. If everyone knew, or if people knew everything about me, they wouldn't love me. And release your sponsee from the power of the devil. Now, others, including many who grew up in the church, might have mild testimonies. They've never really done anything that bad, whatever that means, and they're actually thinking that their story is not that important. Well, you spending time with them, God will use that to actually validate their value in God's eyes and in yours, and hopefully also in their own lives. Now, many of these people grew up in Christian homes, and they actually love their parents. And some of them have not felt good enough, even though they've got great parents, Some of them haven't quite felt good enough and have struggled with feeling not quite loved unless they do certain behaviors. And a lot of them actually don't feel loved by God unless they perform. Your understanding and time will help reveal God's deep interest in them. What I want to do right now is draw your attention to page 2 on your little sponsor orientation workbook, and you're going to be able to read the 12 steps. I'm not going to read them right now, but the 12 steps through which the Freedom Session Journey participants have been on. Participants right now are on step 4, and we actually spend 6 weeks on step 4, which is the most intense part of the program, and we divide that into 4 separate inventories. We call them inventories, where they write out different things. Now on page 4 of your little booklet, I have given an explanation of each of these types of inventories. The first is the strengths inventory, then the mirror inventory, then the shield inventory, and then the closet inventory. And then on subsequent pages, I've given you an example of each that you can read at your own time. I'm going to just briefly go over and explain each of the inventories, and you can follow along with me there on page 4. First of all, there's the strengths inventory where people literally just write down the strengths and how they have impacted people's lives to the positive. For some people, you'd think that that's easy, but for some people, that's actually very painful because no one else has celebrated them before. And they're going to feel a little bit awkward sharing those inventories with you, but that's part of what they're going to be asked to do.
My strengths inventory was really hard because I never believed anything good about myself. I had always believed that I was stupid and ugly, and so when I started my strengths inventory, I couldn't think of anything on my own.
At the time, or the place I was at in Freedom Session, I had a real hard time seeing anything good or seeing anything that my life had done good for anyone. So I really, I kept putting it off. I'd get back at it, open the book again, and I started back further and thinking there must be somebody that I've helped, that I've done good, and so it was awkward. Also, then writing out the things that I've done, and then sharing it with my sponsor, like how the worst parts of me, and now I'm telling you that I've actually done good in people's lives. So that was awkward and hard.
Then you're going to find the mirror inventory, and the mirror inventory is like a mirror for the inside of you. And on their mirror inventories, and they've actually got probably about 10 two-sided pages of mirror inventory, and that's where they're going to write down some of the hurtful things that happened to them. Some are going to write down how they've been abused or neglected, and then they're going to process those memories and even identify various negative conclusions or false beliefs they've come to believe about themselves, and they're going to consider the damage that has done in their lives. And often there's a lot of associated guilt with those memories. That's guilt that other people put on them when people told them that you're bad or you're shameful and things like that.
The mirror inventory is, it's like open heart surgery, you know, where you really have to dig deep, going back to all those painful wounds and times in your life that maybe you wouldn't want to revisit. But with Freedom Session, you have to go back.
I woke up face down, my face smothered into a pillow, and could feel a man on top of me, behind me. My dress was pulled up, and he was not stopping. I froze, screaming inside, and I didn't know what to do.
It allowed me to connect the dots for certain situations in my life and to see why I deal with certain situations in my life and how I deal with them, and understanding where they came from. And having that understanding of where they came from gave me the ability to deal with them.
When I was young, quite young, I guess maybe about 4 or 5, I was sexually abused from one of our babysitters that had come and babysat us in the home.
I blamed myself, self-worthlessness. I felt dirty, disgusting, anger, hatred, sadness, loss of control. He took my body from me, and it wasn't mine anymore.
He said stuff like that just really made me question who I was.
You know, having to look at those lies that we believed and replacing them with God's truth, that is a very powerful thing to do.
And And then there's the shield inventory, and that's where participants are asked to actually write down how they have hurt other people and some of their unhealthy behaviors. And this is where they are asked to take responsibility for their lives. On this inventory, there's a lot of shame associated with that too, because what we teach in Freedom Session is that undealt with guilt, and when I do something bad or wrong, I will feel guilty. So they'll feel guilty for some of those entries on their shield inventory. If I don't deal with it, it will turn to shame. So there will be a lot of shame on those inventories as well. And we will have them process the damage it did in their lives and the damage it did in other people's lives, etc.
Writing down how others had hurt me, particularly my ex-wife, and releasing that. It was stepping out of that and moving into thinking about my shield inventory and writing down how I had hurt her and hurt others as a result of my decisions. It was very difficult to walk through that because I didn't want to feel like I was wrong in any way.
I kept downplaying it, saying that it wasn't a big issue. I would get angry over little things that would turn into big fights, and that also translated into my marriage as well. My most damaging, though I realized this after I started, was my criticism. I never realized that the things that I said about people had such a big impact that they did. I never realized how much words actually hurt, and to have God bring that up in my life when I thought it was a non-issue was really life-changing for me.
I ended up turning to things like to porn because it was something that I could hide.
I had really been broken since my divorce, and I had done things that had separated me from God, and I felt like it would be impossible to ever have the same kind of close relationship, that intimate relationship with God ever again because of my sin.
It was an extremely humbling process, knowing that a lot of the mistakes in the road that I had taken were as a result of things that I had done as well.
What I learned was owning what you've done, because I was responsible for actions I did, regardless of how much someone else was to blame. I still was responsible for my actions, and understanding to take responsibility for those. That was a whole new dynamic to me.
And then there's the closet inventory. Now the closet inventory is for that last 10% the participants weren't going to tell anybody. They're going to write down stories and memories that they vowed to one day take to the grave. And that's where most of the shame lies, and some of them are deeply afraid to share that with you or anybody. Some of them have not visited those memories for absolutely years. We've actually pushed them in Freedom Session to jot those things down, tell the truth to themselves first, and then, along with the other inventories, to actually share that information with a sponsor. And given that they have picked you to become part of this little orientation seminar, that means they trust you incredibly. And we're asking you to carry that trust and responsibility with integrity.
Intellectually, when we were asked we were going to have to tell our life stories to another person and confess the ways that we've hurt others and the way that we've been hurt, I thought it would be okay. But as the date approached, I had a lot of difficulty. I really did feel like I was going to die.
Inventory confession was something that I dreaded.
I cried, I screamed, and I resisted.
Because I was so afraid that my sponsor would tell me how horrible I was, that I didn't deserve the love of God, you know, all of these things that just bubbled up inside me from my childhood.
But I had made a commitment when I started Freedom Session to do whatever was asked of me so that I could make sure that the healing was complete in all the different areas of my life.
A lot of these issues I was able to really go through and digest them and deal with them properly.
It's hard to confess. It's hard to admit the truth. above all, to yourself. You don't want it to be true, so it's easier to hide it. But once it comes out into the light, the freedom that follows, even though it's messy, the freedom that follows is worth it. Every bit.
It took a lot of leaning on God to follow through and meet with her. But it was amazing.
It wasn't really until I got to all of it and had my response from my sponsor, and she, told me that she loved me and, that I was worth it and that she was proud of me and really affirmed how God felt about me in that moment. And that's when I found my real freedom.
It was just amazing to be able to get everything out in the open.
So what is the specific role of a sponsor? We're on page 14 of your little booklet there. In short, your role is to listen to them as they confess all of those inventories to you. And really all you have to do is love them, L-O-V-E. First, listen to them. Listen without shock, listen without pressure, and listen without judgment. O, offer your affirmation, your support, and your faith. In other words, believe in them. Let them know that you admire them and that you believe God's going to bring good from that which Satan meant for evil. Realize, again, much of the material that they're sharing with you, they really should be sharing with someone else in their lives. That will come later. Don't pressure them to now share it with their spouse or a pastor or something like that. Sharing it first with you will make that later step much easier for them. And be careful not to counsel, minimize, or defend your sponsee or those who hurt them. Your role is never in this to be a counselor, but to be a listener and to love them, etc. And please don't prematurely lead them to forgive people that have hurt them or make things right. That comes later, and we will teach the participants the right way to do that later in Freedom Session. Right now, we're just wanting them to be honest with that pain, bring it out of their subconscious, and bring it into the light where God can deal with it. That's where you come in. V would be validate their progress. You'll be asked to initial each page that they share with you, and that's in the bottom right-hand corner. And then lastly, enter the throne room of grace on their behalf. In short, pray. Seriously. We really underestimate the value of prayer. Specifically, respond to your sponsee's needs and their emotions and bring them to God. Overall, we're asking you to respond to your sponsee's invitations. They're going to ask you to meet with together 2 to 3 times, and that's when they're going to read off those entries that they've been making through the Freedom Session.
I had a really great sponsor. Her and I had a relationship before going in to Freedom Session, and I had asked her if she would be my sponsor, and she had already taken Freedom Session, so that made it a lot different. That made it easier for me. I was connected with her family and invited to her home, and she always made me feel comfortable. I felt like I was never judged. She would pray for me. I could read through everything, and she wouldn't give me advice. She wouldn't tell me what I did was wrong. She wouldn't gasp at the fact that some of this was just so crazy that she couldn't believe that, that I would do something like this. But she listened, and she loved me, and she prayed for me, and it was just so important, especially during, I can remember when I was reading out my inventory, it was over Christmas break, and it was probably the most difficult time that I've ever had. Just looking at and reading through and writing out all of this stuff that had gone on in my life, and it was just a big reality check of the pain that was there, and it was really hard. But just having her there and made it a lot easier.
Now this is where it gets just a little bit confusing, because I'm going to lay out what your meetings would look like if you're going to have 3 meetings. But some sponsees and sponsors will only have 2 meetings. So if that's the case, if you're only going to have 2 meetings, you're going to combine meeting number 1 and number 2. But I'm going to go through as if you're having 3 meetings. In the end, it's going to be up to the sponsee how fast they'll go. In meeting number 1, get to know each other. Be prepared to share your brief healing journey, the 3-minute version. If you're having all 3 meetings, you can expand on that a bit, but don't make it all about you. You can share a few details about what happened, but focus most of your story on whatever healing God has brought into your life and what that looked like. This is to help them realize that you're also flawed and helpless without the grace of God, and that's going to lift some of their fears. During your first meeting, we're also asking your sponsee to read off their strengths inventory. And we've given you an appropriate response there. Hey, I'm glad you shared that with me. What do you like most about yourself? After they've read off their entire strengths inventory, and pray and thank God for them and the strengths and value that you see in them and that they obviously have been willing to share with you. If you have time left on your first meeting, and you probably should, you can ask them if they would like to start on their mirror inventory and share a couple of entries from that. And perhaps you might suggest it again if you have time. Usually, just so you know, the first few entries of someone's mirror inventory contain the most powerful or the most painful entries or memories. When listening to a mirror inventory entry, remember that's where they write down about how people hurt them. Try to envision your sponsee at the age, the memory they occurred. In other words, if they were 8 years old, try to envision what they looked like and felt like when they were 8. Because what seems minor to an adult could have seemed very traumatic as a child. And here's a good response. Afterward, just say, wow, I am so honored that you would trust me with that memory. And then you could pray into columns 3, 4, and 5 of the mirror inventory if you would like, and you can see the next page suggestions for that. To end meeting number 1, just tell them you're proud of them for taking Freedom Session and putting in the effort to complete their inventory, and assure them of your confidentiality. And that means you keep what's shared in that room to yourself. And set the date for the next meeting. Meeting number 2, the purposes and the format. This is the main purpose of meeting number 2 would be for the sponsee to read off the entire mirror inventory. And this could be an emotionally draining 2 hours. If your sponsee needs a break during part of it, it's okay to stop for a cup of coffee or a refreshment or a restroom break, etc., but then come back and finish it, because it will be a huge relief for your sponsee to have shared their mirror inventory. And then what would be an appropriate response after that? Just, wow, that must have been very difficult, a very difficult time in your life. And you might want to ask the question, what did you learn about yourself as you revisited that memory? Now I'm going to share something I call it the advanced. If they seem to embrace a false belief about themselves, in other words, let's suppose their parents separated when they were 8 years old, and it'll be in column 4 of their mirror inventory, that's where they believed, if I was only a better boy or a better girl, then mom and dad wouldn't have separated. That's a false belief. So if they seem to embrace a false belief in column 4, ask them how true that statement seems to them today. And usually it won't seem true. And then ask them if they are willing to renounce or give up that belief and embrace what God says to be true about them, because it wasn't their fault.
I decided to just keep it to myself, and just kind of ate me up inside because of a lot of things that the guy said to me. I became extremely insecure and started comparing myself to other men, and got into a lot of same-sex attraction, and that just kind of escalated, and I just felt terrible because I was going to church, and this was something that nobody talks about.
I was quite amazed at the fact that things that happen when you're very young can have a very long-lasting repercussion throughout your life.
My mom and my dad they got married. My mom was, I think, 5 months pregnant with me at the time. Shortly after she had me, she started getting heavily into drugs and drinking. And my dad was at that point trying to save the marriage. And after about almost 2 years of it, he finally filed for the divorce. It was set up through the court that she could come and visit me anytime that she wanted, but she never did. So after her and my dad divorced, she left. And I didn't see her again until I was 15.
And that renouncing prayer simply sounds like, Lord Jesus, I renounce the lie that I am responsible for my parents' separation, and I embrace the truth that that was their issues and that you were there and you loved me even through that. One thing you could do, and this is optional, but after they've shared their entire mirror inventory, you could ask them, as you look over your mirror inventory as a whole, what recurring wounds, themes, or patterns do you notice? Or you could ask them, what overall negative conclusions have you made about yourselves in moments of pain? And then again, if appropriate, you could lead or invite your sponsee to renounce those conclusions and accept God's truth about them. And then you could pray further into their hearts. Now, to end meeting number 2, again, affirm them, assure them of your support, your confidentiality, prayers, and belief that God is working in their life. Again, I'm going to say this again. Please do not attempt to lead your sponsee to forgive those on their mirror inventory at this point. That will be taught in a few weeks. And please don't offer excuses or minimize how other people have treated them. Like saying, well, they did the best they could. That won't sound very good, and that even might be true. But right now, we have not led participants to blame other people. All we're doing is to be honest about the feelings that they experience and carrying their hearts towards that. Now, if you're only going to have two meetings in total, you will combine what I just taught in meeting 1 and meeting 2, and you'll put it in the same meeting. Meeting 3, the purposes and the format, basically this is for the sponsee to read off their entire shield inventory from left to right. And just so you know why we call it a shield inventory, a lot of times I don't mean to hurt people in my life. I'm just trying to protect my own heart. But in the end, I end up hurting a pile of people anyway. So that's why we call it a shield. There's a lot of shame associated in this inventory. So again, there might be tears, etc. If emotion comes, let the person feel that. And it's very important for you to listen without shock or disgust. I heard of one person, even after going through this sponsor orientation training, as their sponsee shared some things, they said, "You did that?" Well, that's not actually a question, that's condemnation. You're basically saying, that is terrible, you're an awful person. That's how it will be received. So make sure you listen without disgust. And the fact that your sponsee has written about those events on their shield inventory means that they're willing and ready to deal with them. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, for the law of the Spirit of life has set me free from the law of sin and death. So a response might be, no matter what you heard, would be, thank you so much for sharing that part of your life with me. I am so proud of you and believe that that God is doing an amazing work and you're taking responsibilities for this. That's what you're proud of them for. You're not proud of what they did. You're proud of them for taking responsibility. And then pray. You pray. They need to hear you pray. They're assuming that you're a spiritually mature believer. And thank Jesus for their courage to face and deal with these areas, taking responsibility for their lives. And we've given you a possible prayer you can pray, basically personalizing Romans chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. In this last meeting number 3 or meeting number 2, if you're only doing 2 meetings, your sponsee will also want to or be asked to share their closet inventory with you. That is where the most pain generally lies. And that's also where Satan has controlled them for most of their lives. And it's actually when we confess them, bring them out in the open, that Satan loses their power. Confess your sins one to another, pray for each other, pray for one another so that you may be healed. Now, if you are an experienced sponsor, if you've done this before, or if you've met with people and walked them through, you might actually just ask your sponsee, even in meeting number 1, would you like to just start with your closet inventory? Now, if they say no, don't. But some people are so petrified of that, once they get that out of the way, Satan's lost so much power in their life, the shame's lifted and the rest is quite easy. So don't put any pressure on there, and you can do it or not. Sometimes your sponsee will even suggest, listen, I want to just get my closet inventory over with. Don't be freaked out with that. Just say, okay, let's go there.
The closet inventory and the phrase, the one thing you're taking to the grave, or those things you vowed you would take to the grave, Ken actually brought that up in the beginning of Freedom Session. And so as soon as he said that, I knew what that thing was.
Things that I ended up putting in my closet inventory, initially I didn't think were wrong. I didn't think that I had an excuse for them, and I realized I was using a lot of my denial, the denial techniques that we learn in the first book. I was using a lot of those to hide things that I really didn't need to hide, you know, things that I didn't really feel were important, but were still really hindering me and really needed to be dealt with.
Growing up in church, I tried doing, I was a leader, I was doing all these different things, and I was still struggling with these issues, and I just felt so much like condemnation because I wasn't practicing what I was preaching. I was being fake, and I just had this big hatred for myself.
As I'd mentioned in my testimony, I started with my closet inventory, but I think just hearing that there was a place and there was accountability, that those things would have to come out. There was hope. I was hopeful that maybe I would be able to do that, and I was hopeful of what kind of freedom I would experience in sharing my closet inventory, even if it was just one person.
As hard as it is to do, trust me, it is very hard to do, but there's so much power in truth, and when you speak that truth, it'll set you free.
Before you finish, ask your sponsee, before you finish the shield inventory or the closet inventory, ask your sponsee if there are any additional memories that have come to mind that God would have them confess and share. And by the way, on the closet, there might be mirror inventory entries or shield where people hurt me or where I've hurt other people. But ask them, and if there are other memories that come to light, ask them to share it then. It's a great time. And be sure you initial every page on the inventories they have shared. Additional sponsor roles and responsibilities, and this is optional, but I hope you do it. Please call your sponsee 2 to 3 weeks after the last confession and ask them if they've forgiven themselves for what's on their shield and closet inventories, because we teach them how to do that. And then if you recall certain specific events that there was a lot of guilt and shame, etc., ask them what forgiving themselves for that was like. And likewise, ask them if they've forgiven people on their mirror inventory who hurt them. 4 to 5 weeks after your sponsee's confession, they'll be taught how to make amends or make things right with the people that they've hurt. And they will need your initials after you've looked at that list of the people that they need to make amends to. Now, if they leave someone off, so if someone on their shield inventory, say a wife or a husband or someone critical, and they leave that off the amends list, you might want to bring that back to their attention. Lastly, and this is so exciting, attend your sponsee's Freedom Session graduation, because they're probably going to invite you. And if you go, buy them a little gift. I don't care how much money it is. It could be a Starbucks card, it could be a meal out, etc. But buy them a little gift, wrap it up, and give them a handwritten card. It will mean the world to them. Remember, they're telling you things they've never told another living soul. They're entrusting you with their life, and your willingness to hear that is going to give them courage to tell other people in their lives and to share their story at grad. And lastly, consider signing up to be a Freedom Session sponsor again next year, and perhaps if you realize through this process there are a couple of issues in your life you need to deal with, why not just sign up and take the whole Freedom Session and Authentic Living experience yourself? Thanks for joining us. Hope you have an amazing time with your sponsee and God uses you powerfully.